right. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Amber Center, and I come before you as a veteran of the United States Coast Guard, a cannabis business owner, a staunch advocate for the people, and a chronically ill medical patient. I'm the CEO of Maker House, a CPG and cannabis company located here in Oakland, California. Also co-founder and executive director of Supernova Women. Supernova Women is a nonprofit organization working to empower Black and brown people to become self-sufficient shareholders in the cannabis industry. I'd like to thank some of the Supernova Women board that's here today, Nina Parks, as well as Whitney Beatty. And thank you for helping us pull together this press conference today. Also like to thank my colleagues, Jason Ortiz, as well as from the Last Prisoner Project, also Kat Packer from Drug Policy Alliance, for helping to educate the masses and arm them with the tools necessary to end the war on drugs. Also like to thank my California Justice colleagues that are here today for sharing their stories from their communities and how the criminalization of cannabis has affected them. Thank you for your courage and thank you for your bravery. Thank you all for joining us here today in Oakland, California, with a rich history of both activism and cannabis. We are here today because we are both tired as well as energized. We're tired because we're tired of the war on drugs, a war on people. We're tired of our families being broken, tired of our communities being destroyed. We're tired of our friends and family being deported and losing their federal housing, losing their jobs, all because of the criminalization of a plant. But today we are also energized. We're energized because we're hopeful. For the first time in history, the United States government is recognizing that cannabis has medicinal value, and the Department of Health and Human Services has recommended that cannabis be rescheduled to Schedule III on the Controlled Substances Act. This is a historic moment. We've come a long way. So what else does rescheduling mean, you might ask, aside from recognizing the medicinal value of cannabis? The answer is not much. Cannabis businesses will see some tax relief, and that's about it. Our friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors will continue to be criminalized by draconian cannabis laws. Rescheduling cannabis does not go far enough. Rescheduling cannabis does not stop people from going to jail. We must stop criminalizing people for a plant that has medicinal value. We must deschedule and decriminalize cannabis. Today you'll hear from some of the best and brightest advocates in California. You'll hear from folks that have been to jail and prison because of our absurd cannabis laws. Isn't that how Vice President Kamala Harris described our current cannabis enforcement? Absurd. Kamala Harris is from Oakland. She ought to think our current cannabis laws are absurd, coming from a place like Oakland. You'll hear about immigrants being deported, whether it be for consuming or possessing cannabis, or even working in the legal cannabis industry. You'll hear about military service members that honorably served this country and sacrificed their lives only for their well-deserved and hard-earned benefits to go up in smoke for testing positive or for possessing cannabis. Today is a day of action. Stand with us, scan the QR code sign, and sign the letter we're delivering to President Biden on April 18th, urging him to decriminalize cannabis. Meet us at the White House on April 18th for our 420 Unity Day of Action and help us deliver the letter. The time for action is now. We will not stand by while mega cannabis corporations make billions while others continue to be penalized for consuming and possessing cannabis. We must stop sending people to jail for weed. Our next speaker is incredible. She's amazing. To tell you the truth, I can't believe she's here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your truth. Thank you for having integrity and for being a shining example to young Black and brown girls. Thank you for reaching beyond the cannabis community and spanning outward to the masses to amplify our critical message. Thank you for fighting for justice. It's my pleasure to welcome Rosario Dawson.
Woo!
Hello, everyone. A few years ago, I had the rare opportunity to join the board of a major cannabis brand, Can, a 2 milligram THC beverage with an ingredient profile and packaging that rallied customers and investors alike in support. The cannabis market was booming, stock prices were up, and the country, poised for a new normal on the horizon, was preparing for policy reform that allowed for more expanded access to this plant medicine in a variety of innovative forms. Now, in 2024, the hard-fought regulated cannabis channel is still hamstrung by outdated and problematic policies. In a world where people of color have routinely been racially profiled and unfairly punished for possession of cannabis, and even still imprisoned for selling or purchasing this plant medicine, shouldn't there be hundreds of thriving Black and brown-owned cannabis businesses? Though billions of dollars in capital have been deployed in the industry, less than 1% of it ever gets to the communities that truly owned it from day one and pushed for its legitimacy. I've spent my tenure at Can learning about the issues faced by the populations most impacted by the war on drugs through relationships with industry advocates like Amber Center of Supernova Women, who invited me here today. Amber has been a pillar of the Oakland community, a leader of multiple organizations, bringing the joys and lessons of Oakland to the national conversation, influencing social equity programs across the country. Thanks to leaders like Supernova Women, the Last Prisoner Project, and the Drug Policy Alliance, communities have been fighting back, winning battle after battle in state after state. Through listening to operators like Amber, I've learned how this industry has evolved. With venture capital and private equity dollars going toward largely white-owned and operated businesses, operators of color are given PR opportunities and licenses in name only instead of real resources. And predatory deals decimate their businesses' potential as the promise of generational wealth evaporates at the hands of policy failure rooted in racism. To be free of prosecution for growing or selling cannabis is something I believe in because it has impacted me and the people in my beloved community directly. Having access to this medicine has helped them treat stress, anxiety, insomnia, lupus, Graves' disease, Parkinson's, Bell palsy, and more. Its efficacy has been validated by 30,000 practitioners working with 6 million medical patients for over 15 years. 15 conditions, My dad being one of them. When he got pancreatic cancer, he was able to talk with his doctor because he was here in California, and replaced several pills that had various detrimental side effects with cannabis instead to manage his nausea, pain, appetite, sleep, and more. It made it possible for him to enjoy a better quality of life when we needed help the most. Having benefited from the work that came before me, I am very proud to stand with the organizers gathered here today to encourage everyone to continue to build this movement and support the 420 Unity Day of Action for full national legalization and the release of all cannabis prisoners. This is a unique moment of alignment where so many different types of people from so many backgrounds all agree it is time for full national legalization, and they are mobilizing to make it happen. This is a touch point in history, and I encourage everyone who cares about people who use cannabis to find your place in this movement today. You would not be alone in supporting this issue. 70% of Americans support full legalization, and it is by far the most bipartisan, popular, and morally correct position in American politics today. As Amber mentioned earlier, promisingly in August of last year, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services delivered a recommendation to the DEA to vacate the Schedule I status. As long as cannabis remains a Schedule I substance, the most dangerous category, the legal cannabis market will collapse, while the legacy market, unburdened by tax penalties and crippling red tape, will continue to thrive, all while generations of people continue to suffer from cannabis's criminalization. In an ever important election year, we are calling for the federal government to see the world as it is and finally remove the red tape that prevents access to an indigenous plant medicine. Reschedule cannabis. Release everyone wrongly incarcerated by the war on drugs, and improve the efficiencies of this broken system so we can finally break the cycle of oppression in the one industry where it is painfully obvious who deserves better. Big thank you to Amber and all of the organizers here for your leadership and persistence in fighting for Black and brown entrepreneurs to have a stake in the growing cannabis industry.
Right, thank you so much, Rosario. And now I would like to welcome up my friend, fellow Virgo, and one of the fiercest advocates I know, Jason Ortiz.
Should be let out of jail, their records expunged, it could be completely zeroed out. Number one, everybody gets out, record expunged. Number one, I think we should decriminalize marijuana, period. And I think anyone who has a record should be let out of jail, their records expunged, it could be completely zeroed out. Number one,
All right, so that was our president during the last campaign trail trying to get our votes, being very clear and exactly what it was he was promising us, right? And so I wanted to start there because I wanted to remind everybody that what we're asking for is not radical. We're simply asking for the president to honor his promises he made during the campaign trail. But before we talk about President Biden, I want to thank Amber Center for pulling this together, and thank you, Rosario, for lending your reach and your network to be able to lift this timely issue to all the communities across the galaxy. My name is Jason Ortiz, and I'm honored to be here today with so many movement leaders who believe it is far past time to end the war on cannabis completely. We are making the choice to come together today to unite behind the call to fully legalize cannabis and release all people who are currently incarcerated for cannabis crimes through the National Unity Day of Action that will be happening on April 18th in our nation's capital this April. We will be visiting every single member of Congress and hosting a very special late night gathering, a vigil in front of the White House to make it abundantly clear that full legalization is the only solution that actually addresses the needs of all of our communities. I serve as the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Last Prisoner Project. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping everyone who is currently in prison for cannabis crimes find a pathway to freedom and to reunite them with their families. Our work is necessary because there are still 3,000 cannabis prisoners in federal custody right now. That is 3,000 people who are missing their kids growing up, missing graduations, missing birthdays, missing first loves, and so much more. For example, Edwin Ruiz, who got arrested in Texas, got sentenced to 40 years in federal prison for selling cannabis. 40 years, 4 decades for selling cannabis. He has served 26 years already and still has another decade to go. And this happened in the 90s, the time when President Biden was pushing the Crime Act and made all of these sentences possible. And so we have examples of folks that are still currently sitting in prison due to President Biden's policies. The president, yes, has taken some action on this issue, but that only goes to show the need for reform and that he's acknowledging that things need to happen. That being said, not a single person was actually let out of prison for those pardons or those actions. So together we have brought together progressives and libertarians in support of full legalization. We have brought together students and law enforcement in support of legalization. We have brought together small business owners, unions, indigenous leaders, military veterans, all in support of legalization. We have brought all these communities together to collectively present President Biden with a choice. Will he choose to join the light side of history and use his executive powers to actually release cannabis prisoners? Or will he choose the dark side and continue the status quo of prohibition and mass incarceration? I know which side I'm on, and I know which side the strongest warrior in the galaxy is on. We're on the side of the 70% of Americans that support full legalization. 70% of Americans are demanding action on this, and inaction is unacceptable. But if Biden does choose to refuse to act, then we will have to bring the power of the people directly to his doorstep and remind the nation of his failings. I am hopeful that when we arrive, we will be celebrating the wise decision of our president to release everyone in prison for cannabis crimes. But if not, we are ready to use the force of collective action if he chooses to continue to leave our families in the dark. And so the choice is on President Biden, but either way, we will be showing up on April 18th at his house with a lot of friends. And now the choice is all yours to join us in this fight, to make this fight something that is important to you this year, and keep on fighting until every single cannabis prisoner is free. And with that, I would like to thank Amber Center for putting this together and being such a stalwart advocate in so many different spaces, Kat Packer and DPA for supporting our vision for 420 and really mobilizing the nation in DC, and for all of you for supporting our work. The choice is now ours to step it up, to really kick this movement into high gear, and when you make that choice, I'm sure that the force will be with you. So thank you all so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to working with you moving forward.
All right, thank you so much, Jason. And now I would like to call up Evelyn LaChapelle.
Woo! Yeah!
Thank you, Amber, for inviting me. This country criminalized cannabis with the intent to incarcerate Black and brown people. And they did just that. In 2013, I was sentenced to 87 months in prison for depositing cannabis profits into my bank account. I do not measure that sentence by the years, months, the days, and the minutes that a judge considers when he's handing out his judgment. I measure my sentence by the things that I lost during that time and will never regain. 5 birthdays and the milestones of my only child. Things like the first day of kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. I lost both my grandmother and my stepmother during that time. Women who played a pivotal role in raising me took their last breath, knowing that I was in prison. The guilt and shame of that has yet to cease. 5 years of career advancement, just making my college degree and the money that we spent on it almost useless. 5 years of income, which is estimated on the low end at $350,000. That's over $250,000 of my own wealth lost because of incarceration. My daughter's college is right around the corner. I don't have a penny saved for it. And honestly, her high school tuition every month is a struggle. I lost 5 years of family planning, and the dreams of having more children are almost impossible now. And these are the losses that affect my everyday life, but certainly the list goes on and on. Now imagine sitting in prison and watching this country legalize. It was just deemed essential during a global pandemic. It's traded on the global stock exchange, and it is now legal in more states than not. And this is the story of so many people, 3,000 we just heard in federal custody. This is their story, and so I dedicate the rest of my time to them. Parker Coleman, serving 60 years. Tony Godine, 16 years. Andrew Landales, 15 years. Joe Akers, 19 years. Edwin Rubis, 40 years. Fernando Nunez, 30 years. Leroy Lavelle, 15 years. Kendall Martin, 60 years. And Valerie Flores, 10 years. That is just a short list of those names. And for those inmates, currently the only chance that they have of being released is by being granted a pardon or a clemency by the President of the United States of America, and we can all agree that his hands are full. My name is Evelyn LaChapelle. My brand is the Weed Lady, and our message is weed is not a crime. Thank you so much for having me and the organizers for putting this together.
Thank you for your powerful testimony, Evelyn, and for your courage and for your bravery. Now I'd like to welcome Ellen Komp.
Good afternoon, and thanks to Supernova Women, DPA, and LPP for inviting me here today. The organization I work for, Normal, has been challenging the Schedule I classification of cannabis since 1972. After years of struggle to get our petition heard, DEA's Administrative Law Judge, Francis Young, ruled in 1988 as follows. Marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. It would be unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious for DEA to continue to stand between sufferers and the benefits of this substance. However, the DEA was permitted to reject that ruling, and 3 subsequent petitions have also been denied, the latest in 2016. We are now in a situation where the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has recommended rescheduling cannabis, but the final decision still rests with the DEA. It begs the question, if we are a nation that believes in science, why is it we are allowing a police agency to determine what is a medicine and what isn't? It took a constitutional amendment to bring about alcohol prohibition in this country, but the federal government snuck in cannabis prohibition with the Tax Act in 1937. When the Marijuana Tax Act was successfully challenged by Timothy Leary, it was replaced under the Nixon administration with the 1970 Controlled Substances Act, establishing the DEA and giving it the power to schedule drugs. It's now been established that Nixon's war on drugs was part of his law and order campaign that targeted Black and brown people and hippie anti-war protesters like me. 50 years later, that unending war has cost our country over $1 trillion, and as we have just heard, the human toll is much greater. Since 1971, California has recorded over 10 million felony drug arrests, including 1 million felony marijuana arrests. The federal intransigence on cannabis law has other consequences too. At CalNormal, I often hear from patients who are denied prescription medications because they test positive for cannabis, even though we passed a law in California that should prevent that practice. Terminally ill patients in hospitals who choose to use cannabis are also protected under California law, but the federal funding of healthcare has interfered with patients' rights here too. And because of federal scheduling, VA doctors cannot prescribe cannabis to veterans, nor can those prescriptions be filled at a VA, forcing many veterans who cannot afford medical cannabis onto harder drugs like opiates to treat their pain or PTSD. Normal agrees that rescheduling cannabis does nothing to address the growing and untenable divide between the state and federal cannabis laws. Descheduling is the answer. So I'm happy to see this coalition of activists here today all working together to push the federal government to finally abandon its flat earth policy, denying the medical use of marijuana, and I invite all to join our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you for fighting on our behalf for decades. And now I would like to welcome up Julia Arroyo.
Thank you. My name's Julia Arroyo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Young Women's Freedom Center. We're a leadership and advocacy organization for young people, young women, trans, youth of all genders throughout the state of California. We have a workforce program where we train young people to get involved in civic engagement, community organizing. I'm also a young person that came through the program at a very young age while I was incarcerated. Today, I want to speak a little bit about a story about a beloved family member and community member of mine who was arrested at 12 years old for selling marijuana on his bike from riding 3 blocks. And he was charged with, he received a felony strike. And for the rest of his life, he carries this strike with him. And it impacted housing. his family growing up, and many other people have these exact same stories that are inside of juvenile facilities too throughout the state of California. And so, let me pull out the rest of my notes here. And we're tired. We're tired of legislators telling us what we can and can't do with our bodies, what we can put into our bodies. Who's tired of that? Right here, right? There are over 30,000 practitioners serving over 6 million people, patients that have different levels of medical conditions. I have family members that are terminally ill and who are trying to do alternative medicine and getting home care. And marijuana is a very, very sacred thing inside of my community. I want to remind us all that we're standing on a lonely territory, occupied land, and so to honor some of the indigenous practices of our ancestors. And then the recommended determined that cannabis has a low dependency profile, and there was a widespread experience by health practitioners. So with the 30,000 practitioners working with 60 million patients for over 15 conditions. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you so much. And now I would like to welcome up my friend, Kat Packer.
I love being introduced as Amber's friend. That's probably the best compliment I can get. My name is Kat Packer. I'm the Director of Drug Markets and Legal Regulation for the Drug Policy Alliance. The Drug Policy Alliance is the leading organization in the U.S. working to end the drug war, repair its harms, and build a non-punitive, equitable, and regulated drug market. I also serve as the Vice Chair of the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition and served as the first Executive Director of the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. My work as a local cannabis regulator here in the state of California and my efforts since then have been premised on my belief that marijuana reform and drug policy reform generally are both an opportunity and responsibility to advance equity. With the decision about how the federal government will classify marijuana underway, that opportunity and responsibility at the federal level has never been greater. So it is both an honor and a privilege to return to California and be here in Oakland, the birthplace of the cannabis equity movement. Woo! With Last Prisoner Project and Supernova Women, and so many of you demanding federal marijuana decriminalization. We demand decriminalization and further reforms not only because this is what we've been promised, but because we know that rescheduling is completely inadequate to address the harms of criminalization.
Yeah.
Rescheduling marijuana to Schedule III won't end marijuana arrests. It won't protect non-citizens from deportation. It won't release anyone in prison. It won't restore access to federal benefits. It won't protect legal state marijuana programs or the 6 million patients who are participating in these programs. It's not going to right the wrongs of racially disparate enforcement. In order to end federal marijuana criminalization, marijuana must be descheduled, meaning it must be removed entirely from the Controlled Substances Act. Both Congress and the Biden administration have this opportunity and responsibility to take immediate and comprehensive action to end our country's failed approach to marijuana and right its wrongs. In 2020, when campaigning for president, Biden pledged to decriminalize marijuana use and expunge related records. Vice President Harris, for her part in 2020, said that systemic change was necessary when talking about decriminalization, saying, and I quote, "Now is no time for incrementalism or half-stepping." Well, let me tell you something, folks. Rescheduling cannabis would continue the very criminalization that President Biden said that he would end, and it is the exact type of incrementalism and half-stepping that Vice President Harris criticized. It's 2024, not 1924. It's time for the federal government to address marijuana reform as the racial equity issue that it is, and to acknowledge and address the barriers caused by federal criminalization. President Biden can take immediate action now by expanding pardons and commutations beyond simple possession cases, ending marijuana-based deportations of non-citizens, and directing his administration to review and address barriers caused by federal decriminalization. And he should be calling on the DEA and Congress right now to deschedule and decriminalize cannabis. The individuals and communities most impacted by cannabis criminalization, those of us who use cannabis, those of us who have been arrested, those families who have been impacted, Black and brown communities, we are paying attention. We know what we've been promised, and we know what we deserve. We have an opportunity and responsibility to ensure that now, in this moment, after so long, and there's finally a conversation about changing marijuana policy, to ensure that we aren't left behind. We demand that the President and Vice President Harris immediately call for federal marijuana decriminalization and take action to ensure that the federal government begins the work that California and now so many other states have started to acknowledge, end, and address the harms of criminalization, and to shift the federal government towards a federal framework that better promotes public health, public safety, equity, and the will of the American people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat. And now I would like to welcome up Jehan Lehner.
Good afternoon. Thank you to all the powerful speakers before me. My name is Jehan Lehner, and I'm a senior staff attorney at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, a national nonprofit working with immigrant communities across the country. We work to combat the layers of criminalization that immigrants face in the criminal, legal, and immigration system. The ILRC has joined the Marijuana Justice Coalition to work with cross-sector partners to support marijuana decriminalization at the federal level. I'm here today to specifically talk about the outsized impact that the decision to keep marijuana on the federal drug schedule has on immigrants. Did you know that immigrants can be subject to incarceration without bond and deportation just for possessing marijuana? Or did you know that immigrants can have their immigration applications denied simply for working in the legal state cannabis industry? Because California and other states have moved to legalize the recreational use of cannabis, many immigrants reasonably think that using marijuana in accordance with their state laws will not hurt their immigration status. Unfortunately, because marijuana remains a federal controlled substance, that reasonable assumption is unfortunately incorrect. Even conduct legal under state law will have severe penalties under immigration law. To illustrate this, I'll tell you a story of one of our clients. Years after California legalized recreational marijuana use, my colleague represented a young man born in Jamaica who had lived in the United States for nearly 2 decades as a legal permanent resident in the United States. He was arrested here in California for a low-level marijuana offense, and his criminal defense attorney wrongly advised his client to plead no contest to this offense, meaning this young man was convicted. While he spent less than 4 days in jail for this low-level offense, he was detained by immigration authorities for months and nearly deported. My colleague worked hard to get him released from custody and allowed him to ultimately keep his residency, but many immigrants are not so lucky. Additionally, we've worked with other permanent residents who have faced detention and deportation simply for possessing a piece of marijuana paraphernalia without actually possessing the substance. We have also learned of people denied citizenship just because they worked in the legal cannabis industry. As my former client's story illustrates, like all enforcement activities, marijuana arrests fall disproportionately on Black and brown immigrants. Any bias in the criminal legal system against Black and brown folks is reinforced and amplified in the immigration system, where immigrants are usually targeted for enforcement after contact with the biased criminal legal system. While the president has issued some pardons and called for expungements for marijuana convictions, immigrants are excluded from the pardons that are issued. Complete descheduling, as Kat said, is the only way to remedy these harms facing our immigrant communities. At the ILRC, we support complete descheduling and reinvestment in the communities that have been most harmed by the failed war on drugs. Immigrant communities want to see real change that will stop our families from being torn apart by the continued criminalization of marijuana. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now I'd like to welcome up pioneer in cannabis, one of the first and one of the best, and my mentor, Etienne Fontan.
Woo! Thank you, Amber, and thank you, Supernova Women, for this opportunity to speak today. 34 years ago, after serving valiantly in Operation Desert Storm, I went to be promoted to sergeant. I would then be tested for cannabis before I would receive my stripes, and I turned out to be positive, and I lost my military career forever. I would lose my benefits, and the next day when I went to college, they told me I had to leave because my GI Bill had been pulled, all because of one positive urinalysis test for THC. I found myself shortly after wasting away due to what was known as Gulf War Syndrome, illness now, and I got tired of making criminals out of my friends. As a cannabis activist, that is how I shaped Berkeley Patients Group. We're turning 25 years old this year. I wanted BPG to be a true compassionate center in Berkeley, not to be treated the way that I was treated at the VA. Just by mentioning my medical cannabis use, I was physically removed from 4 different VA facilities. We are working on advocacy locally, nationally, and now internationally. I also represent the Veterans Action Council today. I just got back from Vienna, Austria, and the UN. And there's a lot going on, and there's not enough time here to go into what is happening. But I will tell you this, we are leading the way. 30 years ago today, I was a volunteer activist with the Cannabis Action Network. Hi, Jeff. He was with me, Jeff Jones. They said to us, it's not going to happen in your lifetime, kid, go home. 25 years ago, no one's going to buy your hemp products. Right, Andrew? Right? 20 years ago, you can't sell medical marijuana. You're just touting medical marijuana just to get high, right? 15 years ago, you can't test cannabis. We pioneered testing. 10 years ago, you have medical, but you'll never have recreational. Yeah. 20 plus states now. 5 years ago, how does it feel to be a cannabis activist? I'm frustrated that once again, we as activists are gathering again, talking and doing activism. Deschedule now. Rescheduling is scratching the surface and we're ready for deep change. It is not change, it is status quo, and we will not settle for it. We will speak up. We will challenge this in every way possible. My friends and I changed the VA and their policies, and now after 33 years, I finally got my VA benefits. My company BPG gives away free cannabis and has for over 25 years to low-income individuals. And currently it's under SB 34. And we ask you to please support AB 2555 here in California to continue compassionate giving. We veterans need access as we're facing an epidemic of unprecedented suicides. We need access now to medical cannabis and stop the incarceration of human beings. Stop this madness now. Deschedule and liberate this plant, and we demand the president listen and act accordingly. Yeah.
Thank you, Etienne. And now I'd like to welcome up one of the strongest people I know, Chaney Turner.
Woo! Yeah.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Supernova Women, Last Prisoners Project, and Drug Policy Alliance. And thank you all It's a lot of powerful people in this room. A lot of people who have been doing the work for decades. And you all have heard the same conversation. We have all been having the same conversation for almost a decade, or longer actually than a decade. You know, the promises of legalization was supposed to bring so much more, and it hasn't. We have people here who have been impacted who are formerly incarcerated. We have people who are business owners. We have people who are advocates and patients. I am a patient. Let me start over because I didn't introduce myself. I just came up here talking. My name is Chaney Turner. I am an Oakland native. I chair the City of Oakland Cannabis Commission, and I'm also a delegate for Alameda County District 18. And I'm grateful to be here today, and I'm just going to keep it real short. As I was saying, you know, we have had this conversation, and we're tired of the broken promises. I remember in 2018, Amber and I was a part of a conversation with some journalists to talk about the opportunities, right? We also was a part of the conversation when the current administration was brought into office. And honestly, I was not very, I was not excited. I did not expect them to do much, you know, around federal, around criminalization. We don't need to have another scheduling of cannabis, right? We all know about the barriers. Here in the Bay Area, we are a sanctuary city, right? And we have many people here who are immigrants. We also are a leading city around housing advocacy. And one of my concerns is people who will be impacted with getting federal assistance and housing, you know, through HUD and numerous other things, right? We also have numerous people, just not here in the Bay Area, but people in the cannabis industry who need access, who are patients. I have Graves' disease. Amber is a champion who also has been impacted by lupus and numerous other folks. And so we have to make sure that this stays accessible and not going into the hands of super pharma. We have seen what corporations and MSOs have done to the cannabis industry in dismantling, right? And so what I would like to see is for us to take these conversations outside the room, right? Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, call your assemblymen, call your congress folks. Stay on their heads and let them know how important this is. I was just upstairs meeting with the new police chief that we have, right? I would love to see y'all at some of the meetings, right? Some of our police commission meetings to make sure that we keep Oakland protected, right? And that there's no further criminalization around cannabis and other plant medicines that we have. So let's continue the conversations, but let's get community involved and educate our loved ones and continue to advocate around these important issues. Thank you, Supernova Women, Drug Policy Alliance, and Last Prisoners Project. We're going to continue working together. We're going to continue advocating for what is right and continue supporting people like Etienne and numerous other dispensaries and operations that are open that are following equitable practices and providing affordable medicine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chaney. And I'd like to welcome up our last speaker, Ross Gordon.
Hello everyone, my name is Ross Gordon. I'm the policy chair with Origins Council and the co-founder of the National Craft Cannabis Coalition. Origins Council is an organization that represents the legacy cannabis producing communities of California in our rural areas, including Humboldt, Mendocino, Trinity, Nevada County, and the Central Coast of California. And we're also partnered with other states around the country, Washington State, Vermont, Maine, and New York, that have their own organizations that predominantly represent small cannabis producers. And I want to say I'm really honored and excited to make the trip down from Humboldt County today to be with all of the really incredible organizers and activists and advocates in this room. I lived in Oakland for 5 years between 2015 and 2020. was in this room when many of the advocates in the room really pushed forward the first ever cannabis equity program in the United States in the city of Oakland. And so I know that it's the people in this room who really have the capacity and the energy and the knowledge to be able to push forward the type of reform that we need, both on the local level, the state level, and on the federal level also. So the reason I wanted to come here and we wanted to come here today is we really want to push forward and support and see federal cannabis policy that supports people who have been criminalized by cannabis, that supports patients, that supports equity, that supports small businesses, and that supports small farmers. And I think we have a unique opportunity at this point in time to really ask, how do we get there? We have 70% of Americans that support cannabis legalization. We have so many states that have moved forward on cannabis policy. And so how do we get to this vision that I think is so widely shared by so many of us? And unfortunately, simply rescheduling cannabis doesn't address most of these issues. Does it provide tax benefits for some cannabis businesses? Yes, it does. Does it deal with the criminalization of cannabis? No. Does it resolve the nexus between cannabis and immigration? No. Does it in itself do anything about equity in cannabis? Anything about small businesses? About small farmers? No. And so from our perspective, it doesn't answer the most fundamental questions that we really need to answer as we move forward as a state and move forward federally to try to build a just cannabis policy. And all of those things, from our perspective, can only be accomplished if you start with the full federal decriminalization and legalization of cannabis. And we have so many opportunities to build from there and to build the cannabis market that we want to see, but we have to start from that fundamental place. As small farmers in California and across the country, we're dealing with a lot of fundamental challenges. We are not pharmaceutical producers. We are not factory owners. We are not corporations. We are farmers, and we're small farmers. We know that we need to be recognized as farmers like any other farmer in order to be successful, in order to bring medicine to patients, in order to be able to bring craft cannabis to market and work with all of the incredible partners we have all throughout the supply chain and all of the incredible people who depend on this plant. So for us, the conversation really has to start with legalization, and just so happy to be with all of the people in the room who have pushed this forward, and so thankful to Supernova Women and Last Prisoner Project and Drug Policy Alliance for leading this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ross. Thank you for representing the small farmers who are the backbone of the California cannabis industry. Thank you all for your thoughtful words today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your work. We wouldn't be where we are today without your service and your dedication. California weed is the best weed in the world. California has been setting the trends and leading the way for decades. From the passage of Proposition 215 to help ailing patients suffering from AIDS, to the creation and implementation of the first and best social equity program in the country, right here at Oakland City Hall in this building that we're standing in. It's only right that we light things up here in Oakland and blaze a trail all the way to Washington, D.C. on April 18th to bring this call directly to President Biden's doorstep. Scan the QR code and sign the letter. Demand that our federal government decriminalize cannabis and end the war on drugs and the war on people. Thank you everyone for coming today.